panel discussions and clarion call theatre from 18th to 20th December on Facebook and YouTube Live.
Morning, ladies and gentlemen. We welcome you all again to the second day of the MLF. It's a bright sunny day here at Chandigarh, and we are coming on live. We've had a very interesting course of discussions yesterday. I think there were a lot of questions asked, which is very encouraging for us. And today again, we come up with some new panels which are interesting in their own way. And the first is a book discussion, Watershed 1967, India's Forgotten Victory over China. A gripping narrative of what led to the short war between India and China in 1967. What happened when India and China last went to battle with each other? Did China win? Wrong. India won. The sole India-China conflict that remains etched in our collective memory is the 1962 war, which India tragically lost. But however, 5 years later, in 1967, India and China faced off again in the heights of the Chola and the Nathula at Sikkim border. This time, the overcoming odds, India triumphed. Full of thrilling international intrigue and nail-biting battle scenes, this book is based on extensive research and interviews with army officers, soldiers who participated in these historic battles. It aims to rectify a blind spot in history and shine the spotlight on the story of incredible bravery that India should be proud of.
Good morning, and I introduce Probal Dasgupta, the author. Probal Dasgupta is an ex-Indian Army officer who served in the Gurkha regiment for several years before embarking on a career in consultancy. Probal's writings have appeared in Yale Journal of International Affairs, Mint, The Print, Scroll, Economic Times, Deccan Chronicle, Asian Age, Bloomberg, Quint, and the Times of India, and the list just goes on. Alongside his career as an author and historian, Probal is a business leader who advises global firms on strategic investment, business and political risks in South Asia and other countries. Watershed 1967 is Probal's first book.
On the panel, we have Lieutenant General J.S. Chima, PVSM, AVSM, VSM. He was the Deputy Chief of Army Staff in November 2017. He has a vast operational and administrative experience, having served in critical command and staff assignments along the entire spectrum of conflict. He has done his doctorate from Punjab University in Defense and National Security Studies. While in service, he compiled important documents of 15-Corps proxy war, turbulence to the stabilization, and the Shiranjali, a coffee table book on Indo-Pak War 1965. He is now the Vice Chancellor of Maharaja Bhupinder Singh Punjab Sports University, Patiala.
Lieutenant General K.J. Singh, PVSM, AVSM, and PAR, was commissioned into the 63rd Cavalry of the Armored Corps. He is the former Army Commander, Western Command. He commanded 33 Corps, looking after Sikkim. Presently, he is the State Information Commissioner, Haryana, and he holds the Maharaja Ranjit Singh Chair at the Punjab University. He is a columnist and writes a very popular column called General's Jottings for the Times of India.
And moderating this panel is Lieutenant General N.S. Brar, a gunner, an alumnus of RIMC Dehradun. His military service spanned 40 years, and he was the Deputy Chief of the Integrated Defense Staff dealing with perspective planning for the three services. He was appointed Colonel Commandant Regiment of Artillery and Honorary ADC to the President of India. He is a recipient of the PVSM, AVSM, VSM, and COS commendation. Post-retirement, he serves as a member of the Armed Forces Tribunal. Over to you, sir.
Viewers, welcome to this discussion on 1967, the more or less forgotten Battle of Nathula and Chola. Indian cultural tradition lays much emphasis on oral history and very little on recording the events of the past, more so military writings. The only one I can recall is a biography of Subedar Sitaram covering the period from about the Gurkha Wars 1814 till the Anglo-Sikh Wars 1849. And whatever little was written by the Indians was subsumed by the British colonialism. So it's a welcome change now, post-independence, that we have a fair amount of writing on military subjects, military history, Indian military operations, as also insight into strategic affairs related to national security. We are very fortunate that Probal Dasgupta has gone into research and write about the 1967 operations to bring forth and to highlight what is more or less forgotten both in the military and civil circles. So welcome once again to all of you. We'd start the discussion by asking Probal what prompted him to research and write this book. Probal.
Thank you very much, sir. At the outset, I thank the organizers of the Chandigarh Military Lit Fest, and I'm privileged and delighted to be here at such a wonderful discussion with my distinguished co-panelists, and I look forward to a riveting discussion. To your question about the purpose of writing the book, as you rightly said, some of the past is forgotten and shelved over a period of time. I realized that during the Doklam crisis in 2017, that most of the historical references around that time that figured in the discussions, in columns, and writings, and commentary were fixated around the 1962 India-China war and the debacle that was there around it. What I realized was that here were two influential, powerful military and political powers whose modern references were seen through the prism of the 1962 war. And certainly I realized that there was a bit of a gap in history, in the narrative, in the retelling of history that was there, because 5 years after 1962, in 1967, as you rightly mentioned, India registered two redemptive victories in successive battles at Nathula and Chola on the Himalayan watershed. I also realized that most people were not aware of the 1967 battles. And this is not just outside of the military fraternity and historical scholarship, but a lot of people that were dealing with history, political science, etc., were also not aware of the relevance of these battles in 1967. I also was quite intrigued by the fact that there had been lots of literature written about 1971 war. We are in the month of that victory of that war. There's also literature about 1962. But the transformative period that India underwent from 1962 to 1971, what was the strategic shift? And what was the period that defined it? What was the period that kind of made the strategic shift in military and political leadership possible? That led me to research and understand this particular period, starting from 1965 onwards, in which 1967 stood as the watershed year. The reason why it stood as the watershed year was, the fact that apart from being a geographical watershed, it had been a military watershed, military political watershed, and a historical watershed. What was the reason? We all know it's a geographical watershed that divides India and China, but historical watershed as well, because if we look at the India-China relationship, it had a very different impact on the years that followed. It changed the template as far as India and China was concerned. It wrested the psychological advantage that China had gained after 1962, and it had wrested it back in favor of India. It also resulted in a long period of no hostilities with China, barring an incident in 1975 up until 2020. So there are several reasons for it. But if you look at a historical marker, a timeline, we go back to 1967. So in several terms, watershed was, the year of watershed was 1967, given that the political, geographical, and military aspects underwent a transformative change at that point of time. I also realized that this was a story whose time had come. And India, as you rightly said, in India, we need to tell our stories because as there is an African proverb which means that, in the jungle, till the lion learns to write, it's the hunter who will always tell the story of the jungle. So it was important, I felt, that the story needed to be told to everyone across India. Though I'm grateful to the fact that, there are several writers, journalists, military historians who had put together accounts of the battles of Nathula and Chola, regimental histories, and several other pieces which I found to be useful in the journey towards writing the book. And I'm really grateful to all of them and the sources. You spoke about oral history. I'm grateful to the various veterans who I interviewed who had robust memories of those battles, and because of which I could piece together a narrative that not only captured the battles, but the reasons or the period that led up to 1967 and the aftermath of the years that followed.
You brought out a very interesting facet in the beginning of your book related to an understanding between China and Pakistan to seize Sikkim and then trade it off in exchange for Kashmir to be given to Pakistan. Now, that's not very well known, and I suppose it needs a bit of highlighting and also an explanation as to how and why this was never in the limelight all these years.
Yes. So what happened was the book, actually, interesting you brought up this question, because the book starts with the India-China nexus. We all know that in 1965, as the war waged on the Western Front, China was knocking on India's door at Sikkim. The aim of China was threefold. One was to make India commit and deploy at multiple fronts. Second was to test India's resolve after 1962 as to whether India had acquired a military and political resolve to oppose China. Thirdly, it also wanted to extend its psychological domination over India. But the fourth dimension, which you mentioned, was that constituted a case of international intrigue and espionage. The book starts with the meeting of one of the CIA agents in Delhi, Duane Claridge, who was posted there, who went on to become a senior CIA director later on. But he was trying to pursue Sheikh Abdullah, who was a prominent Kashmiri Indian leader at that point of time, for a meeting. Finally, they met at Jeddah. Sheikh Abdullah told him a secret. What had happened was Sheikh Abdullah had met with Zhou Enlai, the Chinese premier in Algiers, earlier that year, and he had known of a secret plan that China and Pakistan had hatched together in concert, and that was of attacking India. He had shared those details with the CIA agent, and subsequently Sheikh Abdullah clarified in an interview later that he had also informed the ministry in Delhi. But what happened to it was something that we don't know. On the other side, the CIA agent, Duane, called up his superiors in the US, and the CIA headquarters, to one's surprise, was not at all taken aback, because what Duane told them was a clarification or a corroboration of something that they already knew. What did they know? And that's where the secret starts to unfold. At Arlington, Virginia, earlier that year in February, there was a crisis game, as they call it. A war game had taken place where they had pitted India and Pakistan and had also included China there. And they had discussed a plan which included Pakistan making inroads into Kashmir, which they wanted to through Op Gibraltar and Op Grand Slam. And alongside, the plan was also for China to move close to Sikkim and actually occupy important positions in Sikkim, and therefore force India to a negotiating table where they're forced to barter. What was this barter about? The barter was that India would let go of Kashmir in order to keep Sikkim. Remember, Sikkim was not a part of India, it was a protectorate state. However, given that China had also announced the formation of the Tibet Autonomous Region around the same time as the India-Pakistan War in 1965, this was all a part of the longer plan. to force India on the back foot in Sikkim and take Kashmir by virtue of Pakistan making inroads in Kashmir. What happened in 1965 was that the Pakistani plan came unstuck, didn't quite succeed, and therefore the Chinese plans also did not gain ground. We know, for one, that China had applied pressure at Nathula and at Jelapla at that point of time, and China had amassed troops across the Sikkim border in Tibet. So that had happened. Incidentally, this game that had taken place in Arlington, Virginia, was also a culmination of some of the espionage inputs or spy inputs that were coming in to the US. The CIA was very active in Delhi those days and in the region. It was later on during Lyndon B. Johnson's time that the CIA withdrew from here and didn't have much of a presence. But during that time, this all was happening. Incidentally, this crisis game, as they called it, the minutes, the discussions of the crisis game appeared in a book which was released by one of the participants of the crisis game in March or April 1965. What the game had predicted was that this entire war between India and Pakistan, with China included, would take place in 1966 September. However, it was brought forward by a year because the president of Pakistan, Ayub Khan, realized that India had upped its acquisitions of military equipment, had raised military divisions, and was becoming stronger, and didn't want to wait for that long a time. So China had colluded with Pakistan for a short war in which Pakistan would make inroads and China would make inroads, and that's how they would bring India to the negotiating table on their terms. It did not succeed, but it set into motion certain other developments from 1965 onwards, which involved more of China in India than India and Pakistan.
Now that we have the background leading up to the battle at 67, we have with us General KJ, who was privileged to command 33 Corps, which primarily looks after Sikkim and Bhutan. And perhaps he will give us an insight into the battles per se, as also some related incidents and possibly some anecdotes of that period and personalities involved. So can we have General KJ with your views?
Thank you, General Brar sir, and grateful to you, Probal, for writing this book. This is something which has been very dear to my heart. My connect to these battles goes back to 1976, when I was being trained by Major Bishan Singh. He was my company commander. He was also the company commander in the Battle of Nathula. So he used to tell us about these stories. And later, I was extremely privileged to be liaison officer with General Sagat Singh for about 10 days when he was in Mao doing a kind of study after having retired. That was in 1978. He was the chairman of Rajasthan Bank, and I did the liaison officer with him. So when I went as military tourist to these areas and saw, I realized that very little is known about these battles, even within the armed forces. What to talk about civilians? And when I went at GOC 33 Corps, in sheer gratitude, I did revive the discussion. I have the pleasure to inform you that Sherathang helipad was renamed after Major Harbhajan Singh, who earned a Mahavir Chakra and not the Veer Chakra as mentioned in your book. You are doing electronic versions of this, so it will be a great idea to update some of these things which may have crept in. It happens in research. And we also made a gate which leads to Nathula from Sherathang, which is called Captain Prithi Dagar Dwar. Prithi Singh Dagar earned a Veer Chakra over there. And we also had the pleasure or privilege to do up the BPM hut because it had become old and antiquated, so it had to be done. Now let me come to impressions about this, these battles. These were short, very intense battles. but they bring out the mindset of Chinese. Chinese are averse to defining the borders of line of actual control even. And that is what they were doing in Nathula also. After all, what was Jan Sagat doing? Jan Sagat was trying to lay a barbed wire fence, following the old wisdom, good fences make good neighbors. That's all. Because soldiers on ground, it is very difficult to brief them and tell them that this Nehru stone is in India and it is not in Pakistan, in China. So to avert such a situation and to avoid a thing like what happened in Galwan, he was trying to lay down that barbed wire fence. And Chinese were not willing to yield even an inch. And these short, intense exchanges which took place, one which took place at Nathula, and second which took place at Chola, brought out the forward commander mentality of Jan Sagat Singh. After all, Gangtok is about 54 kilometers from Nathula. But the road is treacherous, even today. It takes time to reach there. But Sagat was all over. He had been on ground. He had defined the line which had to be laid. And he was later controlling the entire pitch of operations. He was a unique kind of a commander. He had done Goa operations. He didn't stop in these two battles in 67. And in Goa operations, he had converted to become a paratrooper at the age of 42 years. He did all the jumps, earned his wings. And paras proudly have ownership on him. After all, he was a Gurkhas officer who had changed to paras, who was given this unique honor. And thereafter, he went and handled Mizo insurgency. And probably there was a belated recognition that he had not been given his due. So he was given his PVSM. And after 71 operations, which is going to be discussed in this literature festival only, at Meghna crossings, he showed great audacity, pushed the troops, sent them, and didn't allow them the luxury of saying that you can't cross this river. And rightly so, he was awarded with Padma Bhushan, a great soldier. I wish there are many more soldiers like him who are audacious, because he took that courage in his hand and he ordered artillery fire. It was later post facto approved. So as I look at these things, I have to very quickly tell you, as a corps commander, 2-3 things which I realize. One is a question that you could have tackled more in detail. Why did we give up Jalipla in such a hurry? Why did we fall back to the line of Changu and these Lungthe? Why did we not hold on to Jalipla? After all, traditionally, Jalipla was even more important than Nathula. Captain Young Husband's expedition went through Jalipla. And today, while we may dominate Sher, Cub, Cheetah, there are posts which dominate. Like Nathula is dominated by Sebula. Passes are generally at a lower sort of altitude. So, but by Chinese sitting in Jalipla, they have observation on some of our communications. Something like what used to happen in Kargil. And we have to work to get a lateral or a communication in depth so that we are not under their observation. And if we look at this series of passes, Chola has less significance. Nathula has significance. And then you go to Jalipla, and then you go to Dokala. And that is where currently the standoff or kind of a Chinese effort has taken place to expand their sort of habitation, push towards Jamferi Ridge, and probably pose a greater threat to Siliguri corridor. But allow me to tell you this, that one thing which you do not examine in great detail is that Chinese are driven by their own vulnerabilities also. Chumbi Valley, after all, is very narrow at its base. We say Siliguri corridor is about 20 odd kilometers. Some say 18, some say 22. But Chumbi Valley at its base becomes even narrower than that. So Chinese have this fear that on both sides of Chumbi Valley, we dominate. On this side, we dominate starting from passes in northeastern Sikkim. Because Kankerla, Fimkerla, Tankerla, Chola, Nathula, Sebula, Jalepla, Dokala, because Jalepla, we hold Sher Cup Cheetah. So we have domination. And on that side, Bhutan has domination. So Chinese also have this feeling that they need to enlarge the base of Chumbi Valley. Because Chumbi Valley can be cut off if we are offensive enough. At its head, we can cut it off. And then it becomes meaningless to have Yatung and all such garrisons. I have also felt always that we must look at alternative connectivities, which is very, very important. Currently, we are engaged in improving the communication to Nathula. The Jawaharlal Nehru highway, which was there was problems because there the geomorphical features are such. There are lots of landslides, and as a result, the roads are not very stable. So an alternate alignment has recently been commissioned, and that is going to add to some kind of redundancy. And even like I explained to you, there is another connectivity which comes from Zuluk, and it links up to Nathula. And there we have this vulnerability of Chinese observation. So we need to have something in depth. We have gone miles from what was our state of defenses or habitations in that area. And today we have thriving kind of habitations. We have, and we did a very objective comparison. I took a kind of a mischief maker brigadier, and I commissioned him to look into how China is, disposed on other side and how India is there. And well, he came up with, and I was thinking that he will come. He was known to be he's known to be very independent, and he tends to not agree easily. He came up with very objective findings that nearly all spheres, our administration and logistics are better poised. So today, we are better poised, and I've always been writing, Chinese are not 10 feet tall. We match them in every sphere. Even the technology that is touted is something which has not yet been operationalized. It is a couple of years away. Till that time, we have to also quickly upgrade our technology. So I'll leave it at this, that you've done a very wonderful thing. You have brought it into Indian discussion and parlance. You've also used a very readable kind of style, and you've given some kind of a geopolitical primer. Some of it you may review in your later editions. So that's a work in progress. You may look at it. Maybe we can have a discussion separately on those issues.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Having got an insight into the ground capabilities and the opposing forces, and the battle per se, which of course the book is highlighted, and all the credit due to General Sagat for doing what he did. One thing which stands out, although the decision to demarcate the watershed with the barbed wire, move the troops up and warn people, and he himself moved up his brigade headquarters or personally moved up to the battalion location. What sort of strikes as a bit of an aberration is that, having anticipated that the Chinese would respond with force, nothing was done to alert, even keep the artillery on standby, and possibly even get the clearances in advance that if required, we would respond immediately. It took about 3 to 4 hours, and that too without waiting finally for the clearance to come from where it had to come to go ahead with it. So how do you ascribe or justify this kind of a gap in the operational planning? Probal, would you like to say something on it based on your research?
Thank you, sir. I think if we look at the days preceding the battle that broke out, when the Chinese opened fire on 11th September, I think where I came from in terms of my research is contextualizing what was happening at that point of time. If we take our minds back to 1967, again, I think given where we were psychologically, we were still, General Sagat had 2 years before that, he had stood at Nathula, he had opposed the pressure of leaving Nathula, like General KJ brought out about Jelepla. So he had taken that important decision. However, I think in my research, in my understanding of the inputs that I received while speaking with a host of sources, including Colonel Bishan Singh and others, was that there was uncertainty at that point of time. However, the boundaries were being made. There was scuffle going on between Indian and Chinese troops at that point of time. There was a meeting that had taken place on the 10th night, where it was anticipated at that point of time, because if you look at the last scuffle which had taken place, it was just a few days before the time the battle broke out on 11th September. So I think the spacing of these scuffles were just one after the other in a few days before the actual battle. So the time that was there was far more compressed, and we have the luxury of looking at it retrospectively. But at that point of time, I believe the time between each of these scuffles that took place while putting the barbed wires between the Indian and Chinese troops were very much regular. The last scuffle had taken place just a few days before the firing opened up. And if we take our minds back to the briefing that General Sagat had given, Colonel Rai Singh and his troops was to for Colonel Rai Singh to stay out of sight. But also, given the fact that the wire activity was going on, I would think that on that day, whether it was anticipated that the Chinese would immediately open up was something that is again left to debate. The limited point I would make is that they had very little time, given that these scuffles had taken place just before the battle broke out on 11th September. So that left him with very little time to really look at it as a possibility on that day itself. However, he had moved the RT up, as General KJ brought out. But you're right. I think there are certain things that we can look at it in retrospect. Given the uncertainty that prevailed there, he took a decision based on what he thought could he could bring to bear, given if the situation went down a slippery slope. But yes, in retrospect, we can say that the clearances were not obtained. However, the other part is that he took a call and did not wait for a post facto decision, which would have been even more disastrous.
Thank you.
Sir, if I could add something, while clearances were slow to come, but we have to place on record, and we have to appreciate the fact that our observation was in place. At Sebula, our OP officers, and even for Chola, our OP officers were in place. They were, and artillery battle, as you know, sir, you have been senior most gunner in a way. Artillery battle is about 40% observation, and maybe even more. So even when it came to use of weapons like RCL, there were trained crews available. Tamzong was available to sort of take on the Chinese bunkers, and they had placed them properly. So to that extent, if there was any lethargy or tardiness, it was at higher headquarters. At lower headquarters, they were all in place, and they had, and that's why they managed to account for so many Chinese.
You highlighted the ground environment astride Nathula and looking into Chumbi Valley. Two major advantages that we had with respect to this episode was, one, we had possibly the entire divisional artillery deployed and available, which the Chinese may not have had. And the second was very good observation looking down into Chumbi Valley. I have personally flown over there for 3 years. I have flown as an AeroP pilot over Nathula. And it gives you unlimited observation right deep into Chumbi Valley, the road leading up, all the Chinese defenses, works, everything. And possibly a similar view would be available from the OPs at Camel's Back and other places. So the advantage of observation, the advantage of having artillery in place, and thereafter the retaliation by the artillery would or may warrant a little more, I would say, emphasis in this battle and its outcome. Probal, would you agree to highlight this to some extent, or any other views you have on these two aspects which I brought out?
So no, I agree. There are these to the aspects that you brought out, but I also would like to kind of add to what was made. The point that was made earlier. I think the fact that the observation, the RTOP was in place, and also there was a sense of there was a sense of urgency, and there was a sense of preparedness that was there from a very earlier time. This is an additional point that I'm making, that General Sagat had right from 1965 onwards to 1967. There are several instances where he would actually be in touch with company commanders and others, and the preparedness, a sense of preparedness, a sense of the fact that there was something that could go down a slippery slope, and we would need to up the ante with the Chinese, was always there. And I think they, General KJ brought out Tenjong Lama's act, which happened in Chola actually. I must say that, he was sent to Mao, and he did a course, and he was brought back there in the area. So I think those things that happened earlier in the year, there was also a sense of, as I said, this again highlights the sense of preparedness that was there as far as preparing oneself for something that would, again, a breakout with China at that point of time. So those aspects were taken care of. The artillery shelling that took place actually decimated the Chinese, given the fact that we had opened up after General Sagat's orders. So I think those things changed the course of the battle at Nathula. The Chinese weren't actually expecting Indian artillery to open up, is what I understand from the research, because they had never expected India to really take it to another level. They thought, India will persist with small arms fire. And I think that was what their perception was at that point of time, when they opened up fire on the 11th of September.
General KJ, would you like to add anything to what he's just said?
Sir, by and large, preparedness, General Sagat, he took over, as we know, he took over in July 65. So he was there right when Assam Rifle Patrol was attacked, he went there. So preparedness, there was no sort of shortcoming on. But you're right to that extent, sir, that higher headquarters, which had been visiting these locations, could have sort of worked out these contingencies, and they should have taken greater advantage of the fact that we had, even when at Chola, that feature 15450 had to be we had to launch a counter-attack. There was certain amount of lethargy to get the orders. And even when mortars were opened, it was initiative of CO, KB. He took that initiative and it was done. So this disconnect, like you have also brought out, General Brar sir, was there, and which we need to take sort of notice of. And in future, we need to avoid such things. We have to go through all the contingencies.
What also, I suppose, stands out is that General Sagat had a great advantage of a very decent 2 years tenure prior to this battle. Taking over in 65 and the battle taking place in 67, which, as on today, I think we are a little disadvantaged with the tenures that we are offering our higher commanders. Maybe that could be a lesson and a spin-off which could be taken note of from this episode. Now, having analyzed what brought us to the situation of 67, the battle itself, incidents as relevant, we now request General Chima to explain to us or highlight to us as to what were the consequences at the higher level, at the geopolitical level, at the politico-military level, flowing out of these battles, and the equation thereafter between India and China, both militarily and politically. General Chima.
Good afternoon, the Chair and my co-panelists, as well as the viewers. I would start by complimenting Mr. Probal Dasgupta for bringing out this book highlighting the forgotten battles of Nathula between India and China in 1967. This could not be a better time than this, seeing the ongoing confrontation between India and China in eastern Ladakh. The battles restored the image of the Indian Army and the soldier who is a symbol of courage and bravery. And it is the moral ascendancy which the Indian Army regained after this battle is far more significant. And obviously, as highlighted by Mr. Probal also, no territory was gained by these battles, but it is the moral ascendancy which is of far greater significance. And we all know deterrence lies in the cognitive domain more than the physical domain. I shall now touch upon my specific part, that is the post-battle implications, particularly in specific of part 3 of the book, Epilogue After the Watershed Battles. The author has highlighted three main considerations, three main events. First is the 1971 India-Pakistan War, which was a geopolitical reality in which China did not intervene. Second was the 1986 Sumdarong-Cho Valley, which subsequently led to the signing of the Border Peace and Tranquility Agreement, and very recently the 2017 Doklam Incident, and of course after the 1971 war was India amalgamating Sikkim as part of the Indian territory. Coming on to part 1, that is the 1971 war, the author has highlighted the geopolitical realities that existed at that time, which did not encourage China to participate in the war. But at the same time, to say that China's non-military intervention was due to the outstanding defense of the Sikkim sector in those years made a critical difference to the outcome of the 1971 war, I feel, is overstating the success of the tactical battles and downplaying the geopolitical realities which existed at that time, at that point of time. China did not intervene in the 1971 war due to the political consideration, and these were basically two. First was the creation of Bangladesh. China was perhaps one of the first countries who realized the coming up of creation of Bangladesh due to the brutal Pakistan military crackdown. As early as 11th April 1971, the Chinese premier wrote a letter to the Pakistan President Yahya Khan, besides other things, highlighting first, he emphasized upon the unification of East and West Pakistan. It deplored India for continued interference in the domestic affairs of Pakistan. And lastly, and the last sentence was that the problem in East Pakistan must be sorted out according to the wishes of the people of East Pakistan. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this particular part was neither published as part of the letter in Pakistan nor in China. It was very cleverly kept hidden. There were a number of letters exchanged between Rawalpindi and Beijing, and fortunately, India was in possession of these letters by July 1971. In none of these secret letters, China made any commitment to protect the territorial integrity of Pakistan or directly intervene in the event of war with India on the Eastern Front. China provided diplomatic and moral support, which of course it did by exercising its veto power in the UNO. China realized the creation of Bangladesh very early in the war, very early in the crisis, that is in April, and China viewed Bangladesh from its long-term perspective gains. China was quite apprehensive and sure that India would definitely intervene, and with India's intervention, the Soviet Union would get a foothold in Bangladesh. China was more interested to keep its influence on Bangladesh post its creation, and it did not want to annoy the emerging Bangladesh leadership as well as the public by siding on the side of Pakistan. That was the main Chinese interest, not to intervene militarily. And the second reason, China was quite worrisome of the emerging closer relationship between India and Soviet Union, and also between Soviet Union and Pakistan. Russia had started supplying arms to Pakistan in 1968. Both India and China took note of this new development. And thereafter, both China as well as India considered working out the rapprochement to reconcile the differences between the two. What Mr. Probal has highlighted in the book, that the Chinese ambassador in India attending the funeral of late Zakir Hussain was part of this reconciliation which was being worked out behind the scenes at this point of time. China was worried the closer Sino-Indian relationship, China was worried of the growing Russian-Indian collaboration, by which it felt any stance against India would push India more deeply into the fold of Soviet Union, which was its arch rival. And Russia, by supplying arms to Pakistan, was definitely trying to wean away Pakistan from the force of China. That's why it supported Pakistan in the Tashkent Agreement in 1966 as against its closer ally, India. So that was the Chinese interest, not to intervene militarily. It did not even posture. Pakistan kept on requesting. As late as in November, Bhutto paid a visit to Beijing and also made a statement thereafter that China would support Pakistan in the event of a war with India. China took note of this thing, but publicly it did not disapprove of that statement for obvious reasons. Even during the war, as rightfully brought out by Mr. Probal, USA kept on egging Pakistan to intervene to carry out at least some sort of posturing by moving some vehicles to the border which would threaten India. China did not do so due to these geopolitical realities which China wanted to take note of it and try to take advantage post the creation of Bangladesh. As far as the second part is concerned, that is the Sundarong Cho Valley incident. The author has rightly compared the operational level leadership of General Sagat to uphold the constitutional duty to protect the territorial integrity instead of any orders from the higher ups. He compared this leadership at the political level, at the higher level of General Sundarji, who defied the bureaucrats when he was being criticized for recklessness for moving the troops in the Sundarong Cho Valley. And that deductions are absolutely valid, and it has been highlighted quite aptly in the book. And it was in 1988, that is 2 years after the Sundarong Cho Valley, the Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi was invited to Beijing, which set the foundation for signing the Border Peace and Tranquility Agreement on 7th of September 1993. Its effect on which has been very aptly highlighted. The next part, that is the Doklam Incident, 2017. It is also an offshoot, or rather Indian Army drawing confidence from the battles of Nathula that it took an aggressive stance against the Chinese building up of infrastructure in Doklam, and it again led to the political negotiations between the Prime Minister Modi and the Chinese Premier that led to the Wuhan negotiations, due to which the situation was diffused at Doklam. So that definitely is the correlation, and that it deduced the inference from the psychological battle, from the psychological fallout of the Nathula battles was quite evident, and India regaining the higher moral ground, or rather I would say the greater confidence in itself post the 1962 defeat, is a major significant psychological outcome of the 1967 tactical battles of Nathula and Chola. That's all what I have to highlight, sir.
Thank you. Coming back to the battles of Nathula and Chola, the title of the book suggests, and rightly, it's a forgotten battle. Though there are good reasons why such battles are forgotten. You would recall that the relevance of Kohima and Imphal in World War II was overshadowed by events in Europe, so the D-Day landings and the liberation of Rome a day earlier. It was much later that their true strategic import was realized, registered, and acknowledged. So maybe in a similar vein, 67 was overshadowed by 71, the big victory. And a step beyond, I would say, the personalities of 67, whether it was General Sagat Singh, General Jagjit Arora at 33 Corps, or General Manik Shaw in the Eastern Command, they were the main personalities involved with 71 also. And perhaps they gained much better, greater fame in 71 than to be credited or recalled for the events of 67. But nevertheless, a time comes when the import or the relevance or the importance of military events are registered and recognized. And we are glad that Mr. Probal Dasgupta has brought this into focus. You would also recall that India's contribution in World War I and II was largely ignored. Till the centenary of the World War evoked a lot of research and writings. And also our contribution in World War II was prompted by the recent 75th anniversary of the end of World War II. So it's never too late that military history, specifically important events of military history, which may have been overshadowed by events elsewhere, are brought back into focus. And to that extent, I think Probal has done a great service, not only to the Indian military, but also to the country at large. And I think with that, we close this discussion. Should there be any comment or any view by any of the panelists to add to what we have discussed, he's welcome. We have about a minute or two to go.
So I would only like to say that it's never too late now that gloves are off with Chinese and we have started taking ownership of our battles and we are commemorating. 1965 was never commemorated by us till we commemorated the Golden Jubilee. So it's never too late. I think the units which took part, 2nd Grenadiers and 711 GR, and also the Jack and maybe artillery unit which was in support, should be considered to be given their well-deserved battle honors. And we should stop calling it a skirmish. It was proper and actual operations which Indians should be very proud of.
Very relevant. I think it's never too late. And there are instances in history where a battle honor has been given even after 400 years. So this is very recent. And considering the fact that we are today more aware and more respectful to events of recent military history, it may be appropriate to do what he has just suggested.
So I'd like to add one quick line here, sir. And you mentioned about how our battles and victories are forgotten. Typically, what I have noticed in history is that if there is a military victory and there are lesser political stakeholders, the chances of such a battle being narrated or recorded is rarer. And it's not just 1967; it has happened across history. Where you mentioned Imphal, there are instances where there has been military victory on the ground taken based on decisions taken by military commanders. They have generally not had too many stakeholders outside of it, which is where 1971 has been recorded so vividly. And that is where 1962 has also been recorded so vividly. And to the aspect of recording our history, it's very important. Otherwise, if we don't tell our histories, somebody else will. It happened with Neville Maxwell in 1962, which changed the way President Nixon and President Kissinger looked at China. History is important, and the way we shape it determines the narrative that it takes on course in times to follow.
That brings to my mind, Winston Churchill was asked at the end of World War II as to how would history treat him. He says, "Don't worry, I will write the history." So I think to that extent, it's time we wrote our own history and not let somebody else write it, as Probal just mentioned. I think we had a very good discussion, bringing out certain facets of this battle which needed to be put in the public domain. The book has done a lot of service, good service to the Indian military to bring forth this more or less forgotten episode. And hopefully there'll be more writings coming, specifically from Probal, this being his first book. So wish you all the best on that. And thank you very much, fellow panelists, and all the viewers who have listened to this discussion. Thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you, sir. Good day.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.